Okay, hi everyone, and good evening from London. So we're here at the Svelte Society London Meetup, and we've got three speakers, four speakers here with us today. We're going to start with Justin's talk, and then Matt, and Julian, and Brittany. So I'm Jen Ashley, one of the co-organizers for Svelte Society London. So Anthony is not here with us today because they just had a baby. So congratulations to Anthony. And Scott is not here with us today as he's not well at the moment, but hopefully he'll be fine for the next one. So I'm gonna hand it over to Justin now, and let's get started with the talks. Oh, sorry, before I do that, actually, let me just have to shift back to just a few things. Sorry, before we. So we have a code of conduct, which you can find, from that link. So if you can just check that out. We are sponsored today by Graph CNS. They've been sponsoring our food for the last few months, not drinks. So everyone has to order their own drinks. And today we also have Offersen, which is a company that actually did the filming for the Stealth, what do you call this, documentary. I don't know if you've seen it. So we have a special giveaway from them. There will be a QR code later on. If you scan that, fill in the form, they'll be sending you some swags. Actually, and they're quite nice swags. So that's good. So thank you to Offersen and Graph CMS. Some housekeeping. So there are toilets over there. I'm just pointing it out to people here in the room. There's going to be food later on, and it's 2-for-1 burgers today. So if you like, just partner up with someone when you order, that'd be great. As I said, drinks are on you, on us. So it's only the food that we're going to cover. Okay, I think we're gonna get on with the talks. As I said, there's gonna be a talk from Justin on Autoanimate, from Matt on Sentient and Svelte, and then Julian and Brittany, red flags and code smell. So it's gonna be interesting. Right, thank you, and I'm gonna hand it over to Justin. Hang on a second. Let's shift to that. So Justin, I'm gonna remove us from the stream and leave
Okay.
you. Do you want to share your slides, Justin?
Yeah, let me go ahead and get that going.
Okay, can't seem to hear Justin.
You able to hear me?
Let me just share. Okay, I got it. Okay. Hang on a second, there's something wrong. Just a second, Justin.
No problem.
Something's wrong with the audio. Let me just fix something. It was working okay earlier, now it's missing some drivers. Okay. If you just bear with us, for some reason the speaker here is kind of missing. Okay. Okay. Justin, can you share your slides?
They should be shared. Let me try again here. How's that?
Okay, hang on a second. I'm gonna fix it for the people online as well as people here in the room. We're gonna
Yeah,
have
no
to
problem.
shift to YouTube for us here in the room. Let me just do that. Okay. Right. So Justin, I'm gonna remove myself from the stream, and if you get started in like I don't know, like a minute or two,
Okay.
and I'm gonna fix it for so people online can hear you, but people here in the room cannot. So I'm gonna change something so that we can watch you on YouTube. All
Okay.
right,
I'll see you
let's
on the
try
other
that.
side.
So starting.
Stream people on YouTube. Can you guys hear me? All by myself here. Awesome. Good to know. I guess I'll wait for a second. Oh, I actually can't hear you. I don't know if you're trying to talk to me. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and roll. Hopefully, the people in the room in London can hear me. But if not, you'll just have to watch on YouTube. So today I'm going to be talking about Autoanimate and the rise of web native tooling. Probably this talk can essentially be divided into three parts. First of all, I want to talk about the idea that something has changed in the world of web development. Then a little glimpse into the future, and finally, what it means for Svelte. So to begin with, I think we should first introduce me because none of you have ever heard of me. In fact, Twitter says that I'm completely irrelevant. I'm a ghost. And that doesn't matter, right? Because my mom loves me. Ultimately, that's all that matters. That's why you should listen to me, because my mom loves me. And this is appropriate actually, because I'm an old soul myself. I remember being a developer when Internet Explorer 5 came out, and we were super excited because there was this great new feature in Internet Explorer 5 called CSS, and it allowed you to style your website like this. You could write an element and then write some styles, and they would be applied to an element, which means we could finally throw away all the styles being shoved into HTML, which was a huge boon. Although, maybe we're kind of going back to that. We'll see. If an off chance that you do know who I am, it's probably from one of these three open source projects that I maintain. A couple years ago, I created Vue Formulate, which was obviously a Vue library for assembling forms and complex forms and modeling them. We decided with Vue 3 to come out with something totally new called FormKit. And it does a lot of the similar stuff. It takes on the brunt of the work of doing the validation and the modeling of your data. And that's right now it's a Vue only library. And then just recently, like, I don't know, a month ago, we launched Autoanimate, and Autoanimate works with Svelte as well as virtually every other framework. And so that's kind of what I'm here to talk to you about today. So I want to talk specifically about this concept of change and how it's been a recent thing that's happening in the development world, specifically around JavaScript. So Swix had a great quote. I think we've just started a period of accelerated change that could shape that could in future be regarded as the third age of JavaScript. I could not agree more with this. I think we actually are undergoing a significant change right now. Swix wrote a great article about it. If you guys haven't seen it, the JavaScript's third age, I'd highly recommend it. And this chart's pulled directly from there. And you can see that sort of the inception of JavaScript was this early stage, 1997, 2007. I think where you draw that line is interesting. I might put it at 2006 when jQuery came out. And then we kind of entered this second age of JavaScript where really important tooling like NPM is getting released and Node is getting released. And that changes the dynamic of JavaScript. And we end up starting to do things like having bundlers and whatnot. And now it feels like we're maybe starting to enter this third age. And in fact, this is, we are now a couple years after this article was originally written. And so I think it's worth looking back on some of these concepts that Swix put forward, as well as sprinkle in some of our own for what we see coming along the way. So first of all, Swix talked a lot about this concept of collapsing layers. And I love this quote. This is actually from way back, I think in 2015. Rich Harris said, "You can go a long way as a developer with the jQuery Swiss Army knife in your pocket." Now, that wasn't an endorsement of jQuery, but I think what he's trying to get at there is that jQuery allowed you to do almost everything with a consistent API. You didn't need to go be like an NPM master and know how to find, these tiny little packages to put some spaces on the left-hand side of a string. You could use one thing to do animation on your page. You could use one thing to select things, inject content, all kinds of stuff with a single tool. And we threw jQuery to the curb largely because of its bundle size. But if those things have essentially been solved now, what is that going to look like going into the future? In the broader business world, there's this kind of emerging concept of a business in a box. Let's build fewer tools that do more things. So we're coming out of an age where we thought the right thing to do was build really, really, really tiny tools that only do one thing. And they probably still have their place. But if we look at something like Basecamp versus Notion, Basecamp you didn't really ever use by yourself. You populated it with tons of information from other locations. I mean, it's a glorified to-do list. I'm sure I'm offending somebody, but essentially that's what it was. As opposed to something like Notion, which maybe doesn't do all of those things as well as each of these discrete products, but you don't have to keep context switching between apps. It does a lot of things pretty well. I think you can say the same thing about web development, right? So with something like Svelte, you're taking what is essentially just a reactive framework and then adding a lot of layers to this single bundle. Your dev environment, hot module reloading, your router, server-side rendering, API frameworks, your bundlers. I mean, there's a lot more even than I'm mentioning here that goes into one of these layers. The product that we work on here, FormKit, is a similar kind of thing. So for forms, instead of previously, you would go pluck maybe a validation library off the shelf, you'd pluck a UI library, you'd pluck some modeling off the shelf, and you try to kind of get them all together in one place. The idea here is, well, maybe the entire form system of the web is a big enough stack that it should get collapsed down into a single piece of tooling. On the back end, we're seeing this too. So Dino is kind of famous for collapsing a lot of layers on the back end. It's a JavaScript runtime. It's a TypeScript runtime. I mean, imagine not having to compile your TypeScript. That's pretty nice. It has standard libraries built in. It's a package manager. It has linting. It does test running, and it's all in the single backend tool that you previously clobbered together lots and lots and lots of NPM packages to run. So layers are collapsing. The second big point on this is that frameworks are melting. What does that mean? Well, the concepts behind all of our UI frameworks, and I'm talking about React and Vue and Svelte and many others, the concepts have coalesced. We are essentially all agreeing on a base set of concepts for how all of our frameworks should work. In fact, we have coalesced those concepts so far that the syntax itself between all of these frameworks is starting to converge. Of course, there's differences. I'm not saying that it should be a single syntax, but you can see convergences coming in. And the benefit out of all of this is that the learnings are transferable. So I want to dive into these 3 points because I think they're really, really important. So concepts coalescing, what does that mean? Well, for one, we've finally agreed that what we should do is component all the things. We should have components that represent, each discrete unit and piece of structure. So components are the right level of encapsulation. That was not something that was all agreed upon not that long ago, but we've kind of decided that that is generally true. Also, we've decided that in general, data should be passed down through the DOM, and then we should bump events up. Obviously, React is very famous for bringing this forward, but in general, most frameworks have kind of agreed that this is true. Next, we've decided that declarative code is in general better than imperative code. I mean, you kind of got to see it to know it, but essentially it's better to say something about your state than to create the state through a series of steps. Composition over inheritance. This is incredibly important. We're seeing this all over the place. It's very rare now that you're writing your UI code using some sort of class extension like we used to, back in the early days of React before hooks, or perhaps in Angular. Now, it is generally agreed upon that a better way to do this is to have function composition. And then this one is debatable, but I'm going to go out there and say it. Compilers are good. This is obviously still a hot topic, but I'm going to come out swinging hard in favor of where Svelte has landed on this. So, if you take a look back to 2016, Svelte comes out and says, hey, let's try compiling these UI frameworks. This might be a good idea. And now, 4 or 5 years later, we're starting to see this idea sort of spread. The contagion is spreading to other places. In 2020, Angular had this ahead of time compiler that got released in Angular 9, I think it was, where essentially you could start to pre-bundle some of these components. React isn't so far along the path, but they did come out with this React Forget compiler, which does some automatic memoization. And I think that's something to keep our eyes on. And literally just, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago at the Vue conference in Amsterdam, Evan Yu said that they're looking at doing an experimental virtual node free compiler. Essentially removing the virtual node out of Vue. Now it's experimental and we'll see where it goes. But honestly, there's no way that thing's not going to come out at some point. That's my opinion. So are compilers good? I would say the debate's still raging. There's going to be plenty of naysayers to this. But it is not a question that really we should think of as limited to just the UI space. I mean, we've been fighting with compilers and the idea of compilers for a long, long time. Very famously, John von Neumann, who is one of the fathers of computer science, has this David Brailsford, if you guys know him from the Computer File YouTube channel. He had this great little waxing on him where he said he really berated a grad student who wrote an assembler. Assemblers are for the weak-brained who cannot work out their own addresses. He no doubt had dreams in absolute binary. The point there being, everybody thinks that there's some better way to do this, but the arc of history is showing us that in general, compilers have won out. It makes it easier for developers, and you can tweak compilers over time to produce higher and higher and higher quality and higher efficiency code. So I'm going to go ahead and say compilers are on their way everywhere. Next, the syntax is converging. So I'm going to show a couple examples here from different languages. So this is a React component. All it does is render an H1 tag on the page that says mounted for an incrementing number of seconds. But interesting, if you take a look at the nuances here, the way this works is by putting an effect or having an effect on the number of seconds. So when seconds changes, it sets another timeout that will then change the seconds. Okay, that's how we're getting this thing to work. And I'm going to write the exact same thing here in Vue 3. So you can see now we have a watcher, and the watcher's dependency is seconds, just like it was in React. And we're incrementing the value there, which is causing the seconds value to change, which then calls the watcher again in the seconds increment. And then third, this is in Svelte. Apart from the fact that the syntax is just ludicrously small, you can see it's actually doing the exact same thing. It's waiting for seconds to change, and then it's rendering it to the screen. So if you take a look at all three of these, you'll start to see some patterns that are really notable, and patterns that are only starting to emerge now, really in 2021 and 2022. So first of all, each of these has something to indicate reactive state. So in React, we're using useState. In Svelte, we're using the let. And in Vue 3, in this case, we're using ref or sometimes reactive. But the point is that we say something is going to become reactive state. Pretty standard. Next, there is a way to say that there should be some effects associated with that reactive state. We have use effect, we've got a labeled statement here, and we have the watch. And then the templates. The templates are essentially identical. You could copy and paste these across the board. Even though one of them is JSX and two of them are basically raw HTML, they are interchangeable, except for the fact that Vue is still using double curly braces. Take a look at the way that these things are structured. They literally even have moved their structure over time. You know, Vue used to stick its script tags underneath the template by convention, and now it's moved to the top. React used to write big fat components, and now they write tight little functions with return statements that are the template. You can see that essentially the logic template, and then if we had styles, most people are sticking those underneath, are really starting to converge. And then the learnings are transferable. This is incredibly interesting to me. There are smaller and smaller learning curves between these different things. So previously, it would be there was a high level of tribalism. Once you started, let's say, becoming an Angular developer or a React developer, that's where you were. And if any of you have been developing for, I don't know, longer than 5 years, you probably didn't start as a Svelte developer, and now you are. And what's happening is these learnings are becoming more and more transferable. The idea that we just talked about there with the syntax of like, oh, I create some reactive state declaratively and then use it in another way, that was a novel concept that is not really that novel anymore. It's just the way we do things. Less tribalism is great for JavaScript. And then interesting, I think this is going to lead to a real proliferation of the tooling around all of these frameworks. So take a look at all of these reactive UI frameworks. Every one of these does essentially the same thing. There's differences in the way that it achieves it, and there's performance trade-offs on some of them. There's ecosystem trade-offs. There's lots of different, things that make each one a friend to the people who use them. But essentially, they're all doing the same thing, and they're starting to do them the same way too. There's an entire second tier of tooling too that is really starting to do the same things the same way. When Next came out, that was really novel. Now Nuxt is literally named after it, and it does many of the same things. I think you could say Remix in a lot of ways is almost identical to Nuxt in some of the things that it's bringing forward. So again, the layers are collapsing here and the learnings are becoming more and more transferable. And then point number 3 for these collapsing, or for something has changed, is that the web platform is what's actually winning here at the end of the day. So let's take a look at a couple tools. It's really interesting that Vite came out not that long ago, a couple years ago now, not even. And you install it or create a new Vite project, just npx create Vite my project. Great. But now you can pick. You can pick if you want it to be React or Vue or Preact or anything else. This one build tool is so finely tuned for the broader JavaScript ecosystem that it can support these things with I wouldn't say extremely minimal effort, but relatively small amount of effort. So small amount of effort that a single person does it. So how is it that Evan You almost single-handedly is able to create a tool like Vite, which is then able to support a broad range of front-end frameworks? So first of all, I think a prerequisite is that you need to be an ultra badass engineer. So he checks the box on that. I'm not saying that this is trivial. This is a non-trivial task, but he does it. And then the main takeaway here is that he's leveraging native modules. This is the web platform growing, and then the web platform empowering other types of tooling that leverage that to get incredible gains. The fact that one person can come out with this incredibly powerful tool and start to support a broad ecosystem so quickly is really powerful. Let's take a look at a few other examples. Xstate. Xstate, if you think about its fundamentals, is essentially just JavaScript at a native level. So they already support React, Vue, Svelte, and native JavaScript pretty much out of the box. Remix. I mean, Remix is, if you guys aren't aware, it's like a full stack framework for React. Really, really new to the scene. It hasn't been out for very long. But its selling proposition is basically like, hey, let's use the existing web platform to dictate the patterns that we use in our application. So it's very REST heavy. And it tries to do a lot of server rendering, but then also have a complement of UI frameworks on the front end. And it's really interesting because it came out for React, but they are already talking about shipping Vue support, Preact support, and Svelte support in the near term. My own tool, FormKit. We ship with Vue right now, but we have also publicly stated that we are planning to ship for React, Preact, and Svelte. And then the tool that I'm here talking to you about today, Autoanimate, it's interesting because it shipped for support for all of these on day one. So that's something really, really interesting to talk about. And we'll get into more of that in detail. And how did I do that? I am not an ultra badass engineer. I'm an average bloke. However, I leveraged native web APIs to make this happen. In fact, exclusively native web APIs. And by doing that, we're able to build a tool that can literally support any framework on day one. This one is interesting. I want to talk about jQuery just briefly. I'm not saying that you should necessarily be using jQuery today. In fact, I'm saying you should not be using jQuery today. But which of these UI frameworks does jQuery support today? They literally support all of them. And the reason that they do that is because when jQuery came out, there was none of the tribalism that's existed for the last 7 years. There was just the web framework. And because of that, it is written exclusively for the web framework. Maybe the web framework of 15 years ago, but it was still written in that way from its inception. And today you can pick this up and you can drop it in wherever you want. And technically, it's going to work. So let's take a look at the future here. If what I said is true, if you can buy into it, let's talk about what the future will look like. First of all, everything's going to have to be written in TypeScript. Doesn't matter if you don't like TypeScript. It's been a bitter pill for me to swallow, I'll be honest, although I do it now. I like it now too. But all tools from now on are going to be written in TypeScript. And it has nothing to do with the fact that people are going to write their code in TypeScript. It's that the tool itself needs TypeScript output. We need those declarations. Otherwise, you're going to be missing out on 40 or 50% of the market, of the developer share market. And it's just not going to go anywhere. So this is kind of a prerequisite that is becoming more and more clear. You basically don't see any tools anymore being written from the get-go without TypeScript. Next, I think we're going to see tools that are following native patterns. I'm not saying that they are exclusively native, but tools like Remix are interesting because they are essentially, they're not saying GraphQL and tools like that are no good. They're saying, why don't we try to reinvest in the tools that are pre-existing and baked into these frameworks? I'm sure many of you are very excited about GraphQL and are still using it. But I would say, observing kind of from the outside, that its trajectory is slightly waning. And I think it's slightly waning because people are trying to come up with more and more native patterns, and it doesn't match the native pattern. And then finally, I think that future tools are going to be framework agnostic. Not every tool, not all the time, and not every framework, but more and more tools are going to be built to run everywhere. So how do you build a framework agnostic tool? I could be wrong about this, but in my opinion, there is literally only two ways to do it. One, use a domain-specific language, a DSL. And two, you only use the native web platform. You can pick either approach, and I don't think either one is absolutely right or absolutely wrong, but these are very clearly defined ways to build multi-platform tools. And I want to go into each of them in a little bit more depth. So let's talk about a DSL. I think you can make a strong case that that's how Storybook is providing multi-framework support. Today, they already ship out of the box with support Angular, React, Svelte, Preact, Vue, Ember. Ember, I don't know. Somebody out there is still using Ember. And it's pretty neat. If you don't know about Storybook, this little video playing here will show you, but essentially you can write a component in whichever of these frameworks you want. You include it in the library, and then you can see all the props. You can change the props and see how the component reacts. And it's a great way to have a component library. So how do they do it? Well, let's take a look at this. This is right from their docs. This is how you would define a button in Storybook. There's multiple ways to define it, but the point that we're trying to communicate here is the DSL. So if you take a look at this, we've got on the left-hand side there, we have a React component, in the middle is a Vue component, and then a Svelte component. And can you guys spot the difference between these three? Literally, the only difference is the import. That's the only difference. So how are they getting away with that? How can Storybook read your Svelte component and your Vue component and your button component with exactly the same API every time? Well, it's because they have this domain-specific language. It's their MDX files, which basically add a meta layer on top of the underlying Storybook application. And the Storybook application underneath all of this needs to have enough information to bind to these different frameworks. So DSLs have a negative side to them for sure. And that negative side is you have to write a lot of extra code in order to bind to all these different frameworks. The positive side is, remember how we were talking about the learnings becoming transferable? Well, if I'm a Storybook user and I previously was all jazzed about React and now I'm moving over to Svelte, no problem. I'm still a Storybook user, no harm, no foul. We're doing this with FormKit. So I mentioned that we were going to be shipping support for multiple frameworks in the future. So here's how it works today, right? You write a tiny little component that's Vue code up there. Your components like, I want an input type text, I want some label, here's some validation rules, I want a placeholder, and bam, we'll render this for you. But under the hood, what's actually happening is we create this gigantic DSL, and that domain-specific language is schema. It's very human readable because the intention is that other users or users can actually write this themselves. So if you take a look at what actually gets written under the hood, it's pretty significant. There's a lot of information there. But the end result is that it renders this in Vue with relatively small amount of performance cost, not enough that users would really notice this. But the benefit now is, for one, you can now ship JSON to your browser. If you don't want to write your components in Vue, you can write your components literally in JSON and get the same render. But you can also, we can write transpilers to take that or rendering engines to take that and run it in a React runtime or even a native JavaScript runtime or a Svelte runtime. And so that's the advantage of a DSL. Sometimes the web platform just isn't quite enough and you need to choose this option. But let's talk about using only the native web platform. So that's really what I want to talk about Autoanimate for. If you don't know what Autoanimate is, I wouldn't blame you. It literally just launched like 3 or 4 weeks ago. Here's my quote on it. Autoanimate is a zero config drop-in animation utility that adds smooth transitions to your web app. You can use it with React, Vue, Svelte, or any other JavaScript application. And you can see the value proposition here. You got a little list here on the left-hand side. You're moving things up and down. When you change Nux to Next, without a transition, you basically can't even see that those things moved their position in a list, and a transition changes that. So obviously, this has existed for a long time, this kind of tool. But what's interesting about this is we developed this in 4 days. I did most of the work on it, and then Andrew Boyd, my coworker, also helped out, especially on the docs. We reached 3,000 stars in about 3 weeks, and it supports virtually any framework. So that's a really interesting case study in how to build some native web tools. So how do we do this, and what are we really doing? Well, let's say that we have a list, and here's one item inside of the list, and what we want to do is inject something above that item. So how would you normally, like, let's say you're doing this native, or perhaps you're doing this with React or something like that. How do you actually make that transition smooth? Well, there's a whole series of steps here. First, you need to measure that original parent. Then you need to measure the child that's in the side of that parent. You need to get all those coordinates squared away. Then you need to measure the new DOM element before it's visible to the user. And then you need to figure out what kind of transition to apply. Usually you start with, when you add the item to the DOM, you add it with, like, let's say opacity 0, so the user can't see it, and maybe a height of 0. And then you animate that forward with a transition, a CSS transition, or a CSS animation. This is literally how every single framework works. Vue has support for this, React has support for this, Svelte has support for this. And they require support because only those frameworks know when that item is going to be added to the DOM. That's super, super important to understand. So typically, there will be some sort of a hook that's run internally, or a lot of these frameworks have a pre-baked solution for doing this, because you, as the developer using this tool, have no idea when that's actually going to happen. And to my knowledge, I could be wrong, but to my knowledge, that's why no tool like this has ever existed that supports every other framework. So how does a native web API work? Well, this is the API for using Autoanimate. It's one function. You say Autoanimate on the parent element. Okay, interesting. That's pretty slick, right? Pretty easy to use. Rich thinks it's pretty easy to use. He said Autoanimate looks slick as all heck, which I much appreciate. Thank you. But how does it actually work under the hood? Well, we need to use a lot of native web APIs to make this work really smoothly. Fortunately, native web APIs means that all of the code for that native web API is already sitting there in the client's browser. We don't actually have to ship hardly any of this. So we use the intersection observer to track the movement of items on the page. If you think about fundamentally what you do when you animate something, you take something from one position and then you place it in another position. So we draw boxes around each element, essentially root margins of the intersection observer that enclose and jail each element. And then if something pops up on the DOM and shifts those items down, we now have trigger points, and we know that something moved, and we're able to recalculate the position of an item. Next, we use the resize observer to track the size of elements. So if something changes in shape, we want to know that. Then we use weak maps to store the coordinate locations of all of those items. Weak maps are, in my opinion, probably the most underrated feature that's available to everybody today. And the reason is you can write essentially memory leak proof ways to store information about DOM elements. So a weak map, if you don't know what it is basically just like a map or an object hash where you get a key value pair, but the key is an object. And what's interesting is normally in JavaScript with garbage collection, if you have a reference to an object, that object can't be garbage collected. With a weak map, you use the object as the key, and if that object needs to get garbage collected, it's fine with doing it. It'll take that information away, which means it's perfect for use with DOM elements. If a DOM element is allowed to get out of there and be removed completely from memory, the weak map allows it to go away, and its data can go away with it. That means we don't care about it anymore either, which is true for us. We don't care about animating items that are no longer there. So now we can have a zero memory leak way to do it. Next, and this is key, we use the mutation observer to track the DOM changes. So when that item pops into the DOM, the mutation observer fires before it's actually painted to the DOM. So we're able to then track the coordinates on this new item that was added. So you can see now we have the old coordinate locations, and now we have this new coordinate location. Then all we need to do is compute the coordinate changes. Okay, so we've added something to the DOM. Now we know that probably what happened is the parent had to grow in size. The item that was a child or a sibling probably had to move its location. So we can really quickly compute the deltas in all of those coordinates. And then we use the Web Animations API to play them forward. If you guys aren't familiar with the Web Animations API, it's incredible. I don't want to go into a ton of detail here about it, but it's really amazing. And you can even open up the Chrome DevTools. You can see the animations. You can pause them. You can slow them down. You can make them play at 2x. You can make them play at 0.1x if you want and slow them way, way down so you can see what's actually happening. And so it's a great way to ship animations to end users, as opposed to slapping a bunch of transition classes or inline styles directly on elements. So the end result of that is you get this slick animation where the items open up, something pops in, and the new item is added with a nice little scale effect. If you guys are interested in reading the code base, it's right here. It's at formkit/autoanimate on GitHub. And now briefly, I want to talk about what all of this means for Svelte. So if you buy into my premise that things are changing and they're changing quickly and things are becoming more platform independent, I think this is actually incredibly good news for Svelte. Svelte is already a DSL. It's a domain-specific language. I think maybe Rich and some Svelte diehards would disagree with that, or maybe not. But the rest of the web development community thinks so, right? They think so because Svelte does really, really clever things like using the let keyword as a trigger for reactivity. That means that it's a domain-specific language for writing these slick UIs. That is that's out of the two things that I said you need to write cross-compatible components. That is one of the two. The other one is that the output of Svelte is web native. This is also incredibly powerful. When you're shipping something, I know that people they say like, well, hey, at Facebook, React is just native JavaScript. But we all know that that's not actually the case, because we would probably never, hopefully never, have a React application and then just like have Vue inside of the React application and maybe sprinkle on a little bit of Ember. And the reason we're not doing that is because those binaries that are getting shipped, or the libraries that are getting shipped to the front end they're just too big and too heavy and too much compute to do that. But Svelte has this incredible advantage that the outputs are actually web native in the most fundamental sense of the word. And then the compiler gives Svelte an agility that no one else really has right now. So I know that this isn't necessarily on the Svelte roadmap, but if things changed, if the direction started to change or things started to shift, because Svelte is compiled, it can move with it. So I know recently Rich Harris was talking about potentially rewriting the compiler in Rust or something like that. Well, you can do that and not break anybody's end land code because the compiler gives you that blanket of flexibility. Puya, who is a contributor to the Nuxt framework, had this little bout here with Kent Dodds. Opinion: the future runs everywhere. Browser, node, deno, workers. If your JS code does run on specific environments, please look into modern APIs, making your code portable, fast, and lighter. And I couldn't agree more. I know that what they're really talking about here is the backend stack, but I think this applies just as much to all of the front end stack that we've gotten so used to. Over time, I think this is where trends are heading and where we should all kind of aspire to be. So before I close, I want to just have a tiny moment of dreaming. These are completely pie in the sky ideas, but when I think about Svelte and I think about the incredible power of having a compiler behind everybody else's code, I can't help but imagine what it would be like to use Svelte to write UI libraries for other frameworks, right? If Svelte is essentially like a DSL, but it's like the greatest DSL for writing UIs, it almost doesn't matter what language you write it originally in versus where the compile target is. I'm sure nobody on the Svelte core team would want to touch this with a 10-foot pole, but I think it's incredibly interesting. In fact, there's actually some open source projects out there. I'm sure you people who are Svelte experts already know about this, but that allow you to write a component in Svelte for Vue or for React. I think that's a really, really fascinating direction to head. Again, you're not shipping this giant library. It's the runtime code's right there. So it's this incredible advantage. I'd love to see more investment go into this. Also, imagine if you could extend the compiler, what that could do. You could almost end up at a place where you have a universal compiler. Rich, not such a big fan of this, probably. 2019, he filed his own issue on GitHub saying, why not JSX? And he said, I really need to write a blog post because I'm bored of answering this question. What I'm not suggesting is that Svelte should natively support JSX or that it should be JSX or anything like that. But what I am saying is it would be really, really interesting given a compiler that allowed third-party syntaxes to be installed. This would be really, really incredible. Imagine if you could essentially write your code with a syntax that's familiar to you and then get the best possible output on the other side. A compiler being the abstraction between you and then what actually gets run in the browser allows this to happen. And the fact that Svelte syntax is so JavaScript friendly means that people aren't having to learn some obscure DSL. The DSL they already know, JavaScript, works for them. You could kind of imagine this being used in a similar way to something like React Native, where there could even be potentially native outputs. If you could have third-party syntaxes, you could potentially have third-party outputs. And it would even allow for more magic. That's probably Svelte's most loved and hated feature is the magic. But I can envision a world that would be really beautiful where you could just say, you know, hey, we just shipped this cool icon feature for FormKit. It'd be cool if I could just in my Svelte code say icon whatever, and Svelte dealt with how to, you know, the Svelte compiler or extension dealt with how to go find an icon and install it in that location. It'd be incredible. All right, so that's me. Thank you very much. My Twitter handle is JP Schrader. And if you're interested in taking a look at Autoanimate, autoanimate.formkit.com. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Justin. I don't know, you probably didn't hear the clapping in the room. But yeah, there's definitely clapping after your talk, Justin, from over here.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for taking time to join us today. We're gonna move on to the next speaker, who's Matt. Matt, are you connected? Okay. I don't see you on the stream. All right, folks, we're just gonna get Matt connected to StreamYard. And we'll get on with the next song. Sorry.
Do I want the video on or not?
Sorry? Oh, yeah. If you enter the studio.
With my camera on and stuff.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We're just sorting out Matt right now. Let's see. Okay. If you. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, that's good. Because we're gonna capture your sound from the microphone. Yeah. All right. Let's just make sure that. Do you want to share slides? So if you share slides, hang on a second, folks, online and in the room. So if you click on share, you can share a tab or the full screen. Okay, hang on a second. We're just gonna okay, so share screen. And then
Can I get rid of my task?
no, just don't worry about that. So share screen. Is there a tab or what does it say?
Open system.
So if you yeah, just give it permissions. Did you close that? Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah. Alright, so hang on a second, folks. We're just sorting out Matt's connection and screen.
Slides.
Okay, yeah. So are your slides, are you using Google Slides or Keynote? Oh, Keynote, okay. Right, in that case, I think I'm gonna have to, maybe you can just share your full screen.
That's what I was
If you,
intending to do.
yeah, if you close that, yeah, let's try that. Because I thought you were gonna use
So close that?
Google Slides. Okay, yeah, close that, and then start from the beginning. Share.
Windows.
Yeah.
Touch screen. So
Yeah. Try that. Okay, and then open up your slides. Okay, I'm not seeing that yet. Um, if you click on share, so that's open. If you go back to StreamYard, sorry about this, folks. Bear with us. So if you open your, so if you click on share, and then, yep. Okay, what does it say? Share the last screen.
So it's on my camera.
Okay. I think what we're gonna do, if you don't mind, Matt, we're gonna let Brittany and Julian give your talk first while we sort him out.
How come I
Okay.
get fixed up?
No worries.
Sorry about that.
No worries. All right. So, okay, folks. So we're gonna change the order. So Julian and Brittany will be giving a talk before Matt. So let me just remove Matt right now, and I'm gonna add Julian and Brittany. Um, right. Oh, okay. Perfect. All right. Want to go to your first? Okay. So they're going to be giving a talk on red flags and code smells. So it's going to be very interesting. Is that on mute? Are they both on mute? Your laptops? Okay. Okay, perfect. Because we're going to capture it from the microphone here. Right. So I'm going to stop the camera, but I'm going to keep us there because we need to capture the sound. All right. So over to you, Julian and Brittany. Sorry about this, folks. Hope you're all okay. Is it? Hang on, let me just double check. Should be. Is it? Can you? Oh, yeah, there is. I think it's just. Try it. That is so strange. Try that. Can you try it? Oh my god. Sorry, can you call someone from the bar? Can you ask for maybe David? Can you ask for David? Oh no, that's I can't hear. Is there a left and one? This is really okay. This is gonna be. Let me just double check. Yeah, if it's actually.
Hello? Testing. Can YouTube hear? Nothing.
Is it working now? Okay, it's just very quiet though. Should we, without destroying ourselves, this is me speaking. Okay, is that better? How's that sounding? Yeah?
Okay, amazing. Okay. Yeah, I think we're good. Okay, great. Somebody was, yeah, touched a dial. It wasn't me. Cool. Hello. Nice to see you all here tonight on this beautiful rainy Thursday. I am Brittany. This is Julian. We come to you from the Bloomberg Graphics engineering team where we work on graphics, and other tools. I'm going to get my speaker notes a little closer. Yeah. So we've been working with Svelte since about 2017. So we have seen it through many renditions. And also in that time, we've learned a lot ourselves and worked with people on our team who have been learning Svelte version 2, Svelte version 3. And yeah, so we have learned a lot over the past 5 years. And hopefully this talk will share some of those learnings with you. Would love to hear feedback at the end. So we will pause for questions. Yeah. I guess one of great. Okay, audio, cool. One of the reasons why we started using Svelte so long ago was because Rich created it while he was at the Guardian graphics team. So it did kind of make a lot of sense for small pages that have short life cycles we create a graphic, it gets a lot of attention for a couple days, a couple weeks, and then we never touch that code again. It has evolved since then. We use it for larger projects. Like I said, we use it for tools that we're continually working on, like a more traditional SDLC. Yeah. Guess you want to?
Yeah, I can take over and do some
Okay,
bits.
yeah. I'm gonna let Julian speak.
Yeah, and so also development speed is quite key to what we do. So a lot of the graphics are kind of projects that only live for a few weeks, like we were saying. And so having something which is kind of easy to understand and easy to debug, and also that isn't, and as I say, also sometimes it depends on the thing, but the runtime can also be an issue, particularly if you're putting things on the homepage or things like that, where it's only a very small graphic. You don't want to have to load a big library. So where you can actually produce a very small, efficient code, that's helpful. And the team we work with is quite large. We think it's about 28, something like that. And we're also working about over 4 time zones. So there's a sort of there's quite a lot of sort of getting to actually teach people. And I do think that Svelte is one of the easiest to come to because it's already a familiar interface, because you're writing something which looks a lot like the HTML and JavaScript that you would expect to write anyway, and it just sort of automatically updates. But at the same time, the sort of magic is actually fairly understandable if you're doing it in the right way, and quite a lot of that is in this talk. Yeah, and as we were saying, teaching people at various stages of the journey. So this is aimed at the sort of more beginner, sort of intermediate level, but hopefully will be of interest to people.
Yeah. I do want to say about our team that when we say 28 people, that isn't 28 engineers. That's 28 data journalists, designers, reporters, data scientists. It's everything that goes into making an interactive graphic. And a lot of those people come from different backgrounds, but they are still coding. And so Svelte has been a really great framework for us to use and collaborate on projects without people needing to like be able to architect something from scratch. We have like starter frameworks that or templates that people use, and then everyone is contributing to the Svelte code base. Cool. Okay. So I have some deliberately ugly code on the screen here. It is really difficult to write deliberately ugly code. So hopefully the point gets across where this gets the job done. I mean, I don't have it up in the REPL, but it creates a box, it creates a line. That line changes based on the width of your window. But there's some problems here. And if you're a beginner, you might not notice those problems, but something might feel wrong while you're writing this. You might wonder why your code is a little buggy. This is a little buggy. That's when somebody might come to Julian and I for help, and they'd be like, hey, I've added this path to my template and it doesn't change width when I change my browser width, even though I've made the width reactive. What am I doing wrong? So yeah, that brings us to the idea of a code smell. Code smells are indicators that something is not quite right. They might point you to future bugs in your code that aren't problems now, but they will become problems later.
Yeah, and also there generally is a Svelte way of doing most things. So it's kind of, if you're not doing that way, then it's kind of harder to sort of think through it, and so it can take more time to kind of debug it. Anyway, so we'll go on to that. We'll sort of wrap up at the end as to why those.
Yeah. So now I think we're going to go kind of more quickly through a bunch of examples of common code smells that we've come across. Maybe some of these will help you. Maybe you'll be like, that's not a problem. I've never done that. I've done all of these. So, you're a better engineer than I am. All right. So this first one is DOM manipulation. This is a huge code smell if in your Svelte script tag you are manually manipulating the DOM. Like, that is something that Svelte wants to do for you. So in this case, I have it with changing the text content of a div. Also other things like changing the styles. Directly like accessing an element to get the width. There's lots of examples of document.query selector or get element by ID. Yeah, I think we want to do the REPLs. Oh, that's that computer. All right. So yeah, basically we have in the REPL like a smelly version of the code and then a fixed version of the code. And I swear we practiced this. Okay. Yeah, so right now the app.svelte is loading the smelly version. I'm gonna rotate. Yeah, so this is the code that I had displayed a second ago. Julian, if you want to click some of those buttons and we can see the text content change. You can see that I have a bug here because I've defined like times clicked and clicks in different places. Since there's two of them on the screen, clicking the second button actually affects the first button because I have query selector. It's just, it's buggy. And it's because I'm doing more than I should be. And so if you want to follow the Svelte way of doing things, much simpler. Let Svelte control the state and let that state pass through to the DOM. So you have a variable that's controlling what you want to say in your Svelte code. And then your template directly binds that variable. Yeah, it's fixed. Yeah, one of the other side effects here is that this allows Svelte to optimize when things change. In the previous on-click version, we forgot to show it, but every time you click, it does like console log. Wait, that's a different example. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm gonna.
Yeah, I should say also, all of these examples, we've made the REPL so that at the end we're happy to take questions or you can sort of play around with them. They're obviously contrived, obviously very, very simple, but it's kind of one of those things where it's like as soon as you find you're doing some kind of native manipulation, often a time to kind of be like, do I really need to do it this way? Very, very occasionally you do, but it's a smell generally. So another one is making all of it reactive. We see this a lot. And it happens broadly in two ways. This isn't the first one we're talking about, is where someone just does the $, opens a block, and then just puts all of their code in there. And, you know, sometimes you're just like, there's hundreds of lines, which we haven't done in this demo because it's just too crazy and difficult. But yeah, you see that a lot. And the problem with that is that then it just gets, as you know, debugging Svelte isn't the easiest always. It depends how it's done, but particularly once you've got a lot of kind of asynchronous code and things like that, necessarily linking as to what the error message is and where it's come from is tricky. The bigger you make things, the harder that is. The other thing is that then it just means everything is kind of re-rendering all the time. And that kind of spreads as well. So that's one of those things where once you've got something that's big and messy, the kind of other things that use it kind of also can become bigger and messy. So just as those blocks get longer and longer, it's often a good thing to be kind of like, try and take apart, what are you doing? And maybe you can break it into smaller blocks, or quite often as well, maybe you actually need to make another component. There's actually that code could be encapsulated in a subcomponent, and then you can call to that. So yes, so sorry, into the, wait, did we do the smelly one? Oh, it was too contrived. Yeah, this was, yeah, we said it was a bit too contrived to really write something that was long, but it's really just like once you start getting pages and pages, ideally, well, you know, Anthony is a big fan of very, very tiny functions, but certainly, yeah, once it's getting into long reactive blocks, it's time to look at those again.
Yeah, I think I would add to this one that not everything needs to be reactive at all. So basically pull what you can out of the $:: blocks because that reactivity isn't free. It means that once in your compiled JavaScript, Svelte is listening for things to change. So here we've got like URLs that are hard-coded. So do those outside. And then in your reactive blocks, you can group things together. We're not saying reactive blocks are bad. So even in this first one that we have here, it's like results depends on what's happening here. Or if you have multiple variables that all need to change when the same other variable changes, like throw those together in a block. Then it's clear what order things are happening in. But yeah, if like, yeah, list did not depend on results here. So list should be in its own block. Cool. This is me again. So the global selector is a little bit of a code smell. It's great. It's the only way that you can apply CSS to classes that don't exist as part of your component, because otherwise that CSS will get compiled out. But it can cause problems when it's not like namespaced to your component, because then that CSS affects everything else on your page, and it will stick around whether your component has been mounted or not. So yeah, here we have component 1 and component 2 are like, yeah, if you could show the app. Yeah, so another component has no styles in it at all. That second sentence shouldn't have any color applied to it. It doesn't have styles. That style is leaking from the smelly component. So if you want to fix it, basically all you have to do is namespace your global CSS. And that you do that by putting any other selector on the same line as your :global, a selector that is found in your component. So it's fixed. Can you show the fixed component? Yeah, very easy.
Now, this is a bit of a strange one because to me, I'm kind of like, why are people doing this? But I see it quite a lot where people start manually subscribing to stores. And within a template, you can just use the $ prefix. And it's just so much easier to understand because you can kind of see it and you're like, as soon as you see that $ prefix within Svelte, you're like, okay, I know this is now a store and that it's reactive. And that's one of those things where particularly if you're coming from other languages, obviously if you're doing jQuery, $something means something completely different. So, but yeah, within Svelte, using within the templates, using the $ prefix to get the automatic reactivity. So yeah, this is, well, the smelly one, there we are. So it's manually doing it. And then in the fixed one, you can see it's less code and it's much easier. Now, obviously, sometimes as well, you might have code which wants to run outside of a template. This is often sort of things that might be to do with like tracking or some other kind of stuff which is running on the page, and it needs to be reactive, but it doesn't have any kind of direct DOM manipulation. So therefore, it might be suitable, or it might be that you can actually put that itself into a store as well. It depends. So it's not a never, but yeah, pretty much within a template, it's definitely a smell and should be investigated as to why you're doing it.
All right, pass-through props, aka using $$ props. This is another one where like it works fine. It gets the job done. Your subcomponent will like get all of the same properties that you passed through to the parent component. Yeah, maybe the REPL. Yeah, so for this one, we have like a lot of properties getting passed through. They're going through a smelly component. Yeah, and then the smelly component isn't using them. All it wants is the name prop, and it passes everything that it received down to its subcomponent. And then the subcomponent is just printing that JSON underneath, and it's not defining its API at all, so it's not exporting any props. Obviously, it works, but it can be confusing. It can lead to bugs later if you want to change your API. It's much better to kind of be explicit about what you're using and what you expect as the subcomponent. This also might be a scenario where a slot would serve you better. I kind of wish we had shown that in the fixed one instead of just explicitly showing the props, but slots are good because then your subcomponent, you would put the subcomponent in app as well instead of needing to pass those props through the smelly or fixed component at all. Yeah, and one of the like bad things about this, besides just being unclear, is that it doesn't allow Svelte to optimize in the compiled JavaScript because it doesn't know what props to expect.
And you also get runtime there's also runtime optimizations where Svelte will say, hey, this variable hasn't been initialized and things like that. And yeah, with props, you're just throwing away all of that useful stuff. And what you're saying, it's a bit like kind of just having a function that just takes anything. And you're like, well, what does this do? And it just means ultimately to debug it, you're always having to open other files and trace the code back to understand what's going on, which is more time consuming. Yes, missing unmount as well. Not this. We're trying to think of other examples of this, but it's particularly when you have things like intervals and stuff like that. So things which are sort of happening, which continue to happen, and then where you're sort of mounting and unmounting the code. And it's one of those things where it is quite easy and quite common to have a component where you just mount it once and you're only ever using it once and you think this doesn't matter. And you can often get away with it there, but it's still a smell. And we sort of, at the end, we sort of talk about some of the ways to find this. But so in this one, when you add the smelly, you see on the console that it's logging out bad. And if you add in fixed one, then it adds out good. But then when you clear them to remove them both from the page, the bad keeps on logging because you haven't actually removed that function. And so it's still happening. And that's obviously, that can be sort of a resource leak of some kinds. It's leaking memory. You could be making requests. It can just be like very confusing when your code starts doing things. It's often particularly confusing in dev as well, because you've got hot reloading, and it can then like get, happening again and again and again. You've got 1,000 things logging out, and you go, what's happening and going on there? So and you see in the fixed example, this is a nice tidy way of doing it, is that on mount you can actually return the function to unmount it. The thing I always forget, or at least did at first, was I was always actually calling the function. I'm like, this thing hasn't mounted at all. So you have to remember it's a function which calls it, not to actually unmount it directly. Yes, that was it.
Okay, this one is a little bit less of a code smell, but it is kind of a tip that we've run across. So we often do this kind of like selected object paradigm, which will be like, you're selecting a state via mouse over, and then you want to show a tooltip. And so you'll have like a store of what has been selected so that your tooltip component elsewhere uses that selected state. I don't know, this is an example directly from an election graphic, but I think it's a similar, like that paradigm does come into play elsewhere when you're selecting something. So it might be tempting to be like, I have selected this state. Or in this case, I mean, American state, territory. But so you'll pass that entire object and say like, all right, I have selected this square, which is, has these properties ID1 and background this color. However, this can be bad because if I were to then modify the original data by modifying it, so you'll see that my selected item hasn't changed at all because Svelte hasn't been triggered reactively to know that the selected thing has changed, aka my tooltip wouldn't update. So the kind of smelly thing here is line 11, where it's saying like on click selected equals the square. I'm actually selecting that object. Show the console. The other bad thing is that if you select the same thing over and over again, it will just call that selected event where I have it like reactively listening to selected where it's console logging it, and it will log the same thing over and over. So it will basically like rerun any code that depends on selected. If you fix it and say that your selected square is 0, where I'm selecting it by the ID, now you'll see that like clicking the same thing over and over doesn't do console logs anymore. If you modify it, you'll see that the tooltip does update. Can you modify it? Wait, that's a very similar color. Okay, yeah, but my selected square is still number 2. Yeah. 0 indexed array. And the fix here, line 11, is to say that selected equals square.id. And then also down here where I'm picking like the background color to show in my tooltip, I'm getting the data from the original array and just using the ID to find the selected square.
Yeah, and so like a very common thing is also is where the key is a string as well, and then you just have a map of string to object, and that is the reactive bit. So you're only setting the string. As long as the string doesn't change, nothing else gets triggered. And also it's often so much easier because you can then also from the command line or just on the console be like, let's change the selected in the console, because you can remember a string, but you can't go changing an object. So it's just a good way of working, we found. Yes. Sorry? Wait, you went past another one, didn't you? Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Mutating objects is a kind of it's a bit of a sort of more general. Maybe this is a smell. It can be a problem, and it's something not to always absolutely avoid, but to be very conscious when you're doing it in JavaScript in general, but particularly in Svelte, because it is reflecting the state. And if you get into a kind of thing where you're just modifying something, and then very often you're kind of like just triggering events all over the place and being like, now it updates, it reflects the state, but it's not actually really happening the way you expect it to. So it's kind of more that you're just making changes and you're rendering. So it generally tends to be better where you kind of make a change and then return a new version, or kind of encapsulate all of that in a store as well. A store is a great place to often make a custom store as well, where you can then be like, this is how I am changing this object in the way that I expect, and then all of those cascade in the way that you expect them. Oh, and another great tip then is also, which covers a lot of the ones we've just talked about, is that you've actually kind of made this accidental singleton. So if you try to instantiate two instances of the component, you'll find they mess up with each other in some way. And so even if you do only expect to have a single instance of it, it's often quite a good development practice just to have some kind of little debug page where you've got, two or more of the instances of the component on the page, just so that you'll sort of notice if they start interacting with each other. You're like, this isn't doing what I expected. And that's probably because you've made one of those problems or something similar. And even if, as I say, even if you're only ever expecting to have one, it's still very often worth ensuring that your code follows these patterns, just so that you won't encounter that these will cause other problems further down the line. So we found that's another good development practice.
Thank you.
That was the questions. Yeah, I don't know. We're happy to take questions.
I also want to say that we will be giving this talk a more refined and improved version of it at Svelte Summit. So we would love to hear feedback if any of these particularly resonated with you. If you've run into a code smell that we missed, please let us know. Yeah, and if you have questions about Bloomberg, questions about Bloomberg graphics, happy to answer those as well. Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to the third talk from Matt. Let's just get him ready in a second. So thank you for bearing with us with all the technical issues with sound. Right, so Matt's going to be joining in a bit. You're there. Turn your camera. What's that? Okay. Yeah. I think you have to do that. Yeah. All right. He's just gonna restart Chrome, and hopefully that will fix the problem. Okay. So as we mentioned earlier, or as I mentioned earlier, there's a giveaway from OfferSend. So we're going to be providing a link as well, or a QR code. And anyone who joined us here in person and also online can request for swags. And those swags are actually related to the Svelte documentary that OfferSend produced. So we're going to be sharing that after Matt's talk. What I'm gonna do for people online is I'm just gonna post the link here on YouTube live comments. So look out for that after the last talk. And in person, we're just gonna share the QR code and people can scan that. Right. So Matt's still getting ready. So just bear with us for a few more minutes. Hope everyone's having a good day. It was certainly good here in London earlier. Now it's a bit gray, as usual. So for those who have not bought their ticket for Svelte Summit yet, there's still a lot of time. So it's happening in September in Stockholm. So if you haven't purchased your ticket, there's still a lot available. So sign up, and we'll see you in Stockholm in September. Almost there. gonna try and find that link for the swags so that we can share it with people online. The Matt's here. Hang on a second. Okay. All right, let me add that to the stream. Right, I think we're almost there. You wanna push your presentation? Okay. If you go to your presentation, okay, perfect. So, do you wanna do it there?
I need to go into your presentation. You're not getting my browser.
Yes, yes. We've got it. Yeah. So you need to figure it out. All right. All right. So Matt's ready. So just give us like a minute so you can actually get closer to the microphone here in the room, so people in the room can also hear what he's going to be sharing. So give us a minute, and we can get started.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Broad. I'm the founder of a non-profit called Inspirational People. We've been working with Svelte and Svelte Kit for a few years, just very gradually building a new platform that serves mobile apps and websites using progressive web apps. So today I'm just going to show you a little bit about what we've done on the Inspirational People project. And then during the project, it became obvious that actually what we were making for and about world-renowned inspirational people was actually a solution that has a potentially much wider use case. And as a result, we kind of split our activity and created a new platform, which we're now introducing as Sentient. And this is a platform that uses SvelteKit and provides mobile apps and websites. So so the Inspirational People nonprofit is creating digital resources for and about world-renowned inspirational people. The intention has been to offer a subscription service from which we will be donating 70% of subscription revenue to other non-profit organizations. As I mentioned, Sentient is the sort of byproduct or branch off from what we were initially building in the Inspirational People project. And I'm going to talk you through what that does, its features, but it essentially provides like a CMS and a blog type functionality. And it also does sort of image and video uploading, if you're familiar with that functionality in some of the platforms that are already out there. And we will also be releasing it as open source. So if anyone is interested in having a play with some code or standing up a platform and offering a service to a lot of people, then hopefully this may be of use. So as I mentioned, I'm the founder of Inspirational People. Craig Hawkes is the technical lead and senior developer. Craig and I have worked on and off for probably about 15 years or so. He's kind of been leading a lot of the technology decisions and doing a good portion of work, and at the same time we've hired some Svelte developers that have done the bulk of the Svelte work. So we've had a mixture, kind of quite a range of team members from all around the globe, and we've had team members from sort of 15 different countries, and that sounds quite large, and it's not tiny, but and quite a number of those will have done a small amount, so we're not quite as big as that might sound. So I'm just curious to start, please. I'm asking whether any of you are creating a lot of online content, whether you do so either for work or play yourselves. Anyone here? No? Not really? That seems to be the general question, the answer I get a lot of the time. And is anyone working or experienced with progressive web apps? A little bit? Yes? Cool. Does everyone know what a progressive web is? Generally? Yeah. Some nods, that's good. Cool. Also, just to ask, has anyone read The Mum Test by Rob Fitzpatrick, who's an ex-YC founder? He wrote a book which I've sort of started reading and I haven't finished, but it's all about getting good feedback, the methods of getting feedback from people when you've got a new product or service. Yes, it's an excellent book. I haven't finished it, and what I'm doing today probably breaks a lot of his rules because I'm going to be asking you for feedback on what you make of the solution we've created. Cool. Okay, so I'm just showing you quickly here, please. We've got ip.new on the left side and combat.ip.new. I'll just bring them up in another browser tab so you can see them. So just looking through here, you can see obviously there's a mobile app there, and for each of the people on the right-hand side, there's a separate mobile app and website. Cool. And the format is similar for each person. The sort of format and structure is similar, with an about page that describes who they are, what they're known for. We've got an interview section which will have an interviews library of the various different interviews and podcasts that they've been on. So if you've got an interest in the person, you can look up and see where they've been and where they've been interviewed, what podcast they've been. We vary the pages for each person, but in Richard's case, obviously he's done a lot of talks, so we've collected the talks that he's done into one page here. So if you're interested, there's a library there of Rich talks. And we also have a stream page, which is just recent online news and activity, either by the person or by media or other people creating content about them. And as we've got quite a range of people from all different sectors of society and different industries and parts of the world. It's quite a range of people. We wanted to create a section on a particular topic, and this one's about combat sports. So if anyone's into combat sports, you may recognize some of the people we've got there. But there's sort of fight history, all their fight videos, or those that we can find online. So lots of different resources about inspirational people. Good. So in the beginning, obviously, we had a choice to make which technology we would work with. We looked at all the JavaScript frameworks. We built our first app with Next.js, which worked very, effectively, and we were kind of happy with it. But at the same time, as we thought about what we wanted to do and where we wanted to go longer term, we evaluated other frameworks, and in doing so, the subject of vanilla JavaScript came up quite a lot, and we're particularly interested in performance for, the longer term performance and how important that is for the user experience. And as a result, we eventually got on to hearing about Svelte. So we started with Svelte, knowing that Svelte Kit was also coming, or would be coming. And yeah, I guess as I mentioned, the performance was a big factor. Also, the developer community and the projected trajectory of the community. And also, there's just so many great reviews about what was happening in this Svelte environment and the Svelte world. We've also had some past experience adopting a new framework. We did worked with Ruby on Rails when it was fairly new, not quite as new as this. So we went from Next.js to Svelte and then on to SvelteKit. So just to run over at a high level what progressive web applications do, some of the benefits include that they by writing a single code base for Android and iOS, Windows and Linux, you obviously just have a single code base to maintain. With the PWA, you can also install the mobile app through the browser, so there's no need to go to the Google Play or Apple app stores. Deploys are obviously immediate without any app stores, which is great for updates, etc. PWAs are great for performance. They can have offline capabilities, which at the moment we're not doing too much on that front, but we will do. And they're also great for security. Oh, that's a bit early. So now if I just give you a little overview of Sentient, you'll see that it looks pretty similar. This is the sort of a site that's built on Sentient, which is very similar to Inspirational People. I'll just run you through, hopefully. Oops. So Sentient allows the creation of customized mobile apps and websites. I mentioned previously the CMS and blog type functionality allows either individual or editorial team collaboration to create content. It allows the curation of content from all the major social and video platforms. It's also good for aggregating news and media content. You can also integrate e-commerce product listings, and it's also good for sort of image and video uploading and playback, plus many more things. So I've got an examples page which shows some of the content which has been created with so this first video just shows the process for installing an app without going to an app store. So yeah, it's not, sorry, the buttons aren't that clear, but we're clicking on install each time, and you'll see the app is just added at the top of the screen. It says it's added to the home screen, so that's installed the app. And then you can see the app appear on the mobile phone. So this is just creating a post from sort of within the CMS. It's pretty straightforward, as with most content management systems. And you'll see down the bottom of the page, there's options for adding pictures, share URLs, embed codes, and you can also specify the order of the content. So if you want the media to appear first. This next video just shows sharing of content from your mobile phone when you've got like the YouTube or any of the social apps open. You can go through the normal process to share an item. And in doing so, you're offered the Sentient app as a destination to share to. You just give it a name, choose which page you want it. And there it is at the top of the list. There's 2 entries here because I didn't record the first one, so it wasn't a duplicate entry. It was just I repeated the process twice because I didn't think it had recorded. So it's please excuse this. So just showing you here when you've got a page of posts or content, it's quite a simple process to organize what you've got there. So that's saving something as draft. And now we're dragging and moving that content around as we want to see it on the page. The numbers on the left indicate where it will appear on the page. So in terms of what you can upload, so I've just uploaded our Inspirational People logo icon, just as an example. We create the mobile apps. I'll just click on these. Those are 3 separate apps for 3 different people. Dan Hardy, Serena Williams, and Miles Toland. You can see the format's a little bit different for each, and that's just because those screenshots were taken at different times. And Serena Williams is the most recent addition there, so the others will look in the same layout as her. Can you see that? Oh, it's tiny on your screen, isn't it? Sorry, yeah. But that's just showing some of the mobile apps which I've got installed. And basically, they're all the same process. You go to the domain name /install, and you get an option to install the app. With PWAs as well, you can push so that when someone arrives on the site or when they've been to the site a number of times, then at that point you can offer it. But at the moment, we're just doing it through a manual process. So click to initiate the install. So this is just a share from TikTok of Ricky Gervais talking about new women by the look of it. Here's another one from YouTube, just a lane 8. I've got a video capture from Instagram, but I actually note that it didn't succeed. Oh. So it's a repeat of the same process of sharing the content, choosing the page, and then it goes to the new page. And I guess the nice bit is obviously that's updating in real time in the app on the website. So I've just included some of the some examples of some of the other content that we can pull in very easily. YouTube, LinkedIn, Spotify, Instagram's not loading for me today for some reason. It's a Reddit post, SoundCloud, BBC News. So the news media is slightly different, but using Open Graph Protocol, we pull in some content in that way. Also e-commerce listings. So if you'd like to, you wanted to promote a book or any product from Amazon, with Amazon it includes the option to do a purchase. And then we've got other examples from Waterstones, eBay, and Shopify. So hopefully you're getting a picture of how we can bring together content from different sources. So sorry, there's quite a lot on this page, and I won't go over every last item, but try and give a high-level overview of the items which I haven't repeated. It's multi-domain, so in terms of if you stand this infrastructure up, then you can serve just on your own domain or any other domain. So that makes it, yeah, you can use your subdomains or external domains. So what else is there to add from there? Yeah, so by having your own app, in terms of if you've got your own app and you've got other people who've installed your app, with notifications, you're going to have a direct connection to that person. Obviously, when you're posting on social or any of the big platforms, you're competing with all other content creators on that platform. And yeah, it may be that you're competing with someone in the same space, or it may be just the time you're competing with the time that someone following your content may be looking at photos or videos of their family or whatever else. There's but having your own app gives you that direct connection and notifications to that person. We've been working with or talking with some email providers, and we'll be able to offer email with the domain. So obviously we're working with SvelteKit, which is pretty new, and generally our interest is in working, taking advantage of the new technologies. Some of the differences between what the platform does versus some of the other platforms that are already out there. I guess we're kind of old school internet in terms of outbound linking is good, open web principles. So yeah, freedom to use your link as the internet was designed. You're welcome to sort of promote or advertise your own things on the platform with no ads. But if you take the platform in open source, you could easily add ads to it. It's also search engine friendly, which some of the major platforms are not, in terms of they keep your content just within their closed walls. Privacy is the preference, and yeah, we're not doing any displayed advertising, so we'll be avoiding areas which some of the other companies seem to get in conflict for. Freedom of speech, again, you can potentially say or do what you want, especially if you're using it on your own domain name. You can choose your own domain name. I think the pagination's a bit messed up on that a little bit. You've got a lot of bullet points. But you can potentially market your own app and domain name with your own email, the install for installing the app, and then redirects. So if you wanted to put a / the name of a social provider or whatever you would like to another URL to the destination of the other platform. Good. Cool. We obviously we'll be releasing as open source. The platform doesn't have a likes button, which we're looking to exclude. I don't know how you guys feel about likes and other parts of social, but you can please tell me shortly. Cool. Sorry, this page just highlights some of the non-profits we intend to support, donate to, and that is the Cool Earth, the Open Source Initiative, and UNICEF. That's some of the technologies we're using at the moment, and it obviously also shows some of the other things we've used previously. There's an article here from Google on the web.dev site describing how to use PWAs. We've got another resource about PWAs, which we will add in here as well. The map there just shows where different members of the team have been working from or come from. And the last three posts here are one for each of the non-profits. We've got the Cool Earth, who are fighting the climate crisis, the OSI, and UNICEF, who help children in critical situations. We've got a little newsletter on the end if you'd like to sign up for any updates that we may have in the future. So I think that's pretty much all I was going to show. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Matt. As I said, I'll post I think what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna leave the QR code on the screen. So anyone online, you can just scan that, and anyone in the room can scan it as well. But give me a few minutes because I just want to sort out people here in the room in terms of food. It's quite late here in London, so I just want to make sure people are fed. So everyone, what we're gonna do with food is if you just pair with another person, you can just go to the bar and say that you're ordering burgers. So it's 2 for 1 tonight. That's what I was taking care of. And to say go with the conference. Because we have the tab open for food, but not for drinks. So you can order your drinks. Thanks for joining us and enjoy. I'm just gonna sort out the QR code. All right, everyone. I'm just gonna find a QR code that offers and shared with us for everyone online and everyone in the room. So give me just 2 minutes. I should be able to. That. I just share my screen and then we share. I'm just gonna leave it open and you folks can scan it. Okay, I don't know if you can. Oh, I don't know what's happening here. Right. I don't know if you. Hey. How come it's doing that sound also? There was something there. Stop sharing. How can I share that? Post. Willow, do you know? You know how I can share this thing? I don't know why it's. Anyway, hopefully people can see that. Can people actually see that? Okay, hopefully folks can see that. Let me know if not. I just leave it like that. It's not very elegant, but okay. Hopefully you folks can see that online. So if you scan that and fill in your details, you will be sent swags from Overset. All right, I'll leave it like that. And we're gonna enjoy our burgers here over in London. How are you? It's so stressful. Huh? You want to pair up? You can order burger. You can pair up. You want to order burgers? Right? So they're like underneath. So there should be one there. This one's. Doesn't have a final. All right, I'm going to end this broadcast now because it's still broadcasting.